Hi, Ed here from Crystal Clear Aquatics, and today I'm starting my next project, which is a full restoration and redesign of a pond. So this is the current pond in position. We've got a nice, quite formal sort of square design here. Very shallow, about 18 inches deep, and it's surrounded here by a nice new patio and planter which has been built. And the brief for this job is to tie in this pond and the edging and the surrounding with a nice new paving and planting which has been built, to raise up that back wall slightly so that we can create a nice cascade with the use of one of the stainless steel wires of shear descents, and that'll be a great way of returning water from the filtration system back into the pond and create a nice sound and a nice feature as well. Gone are going to go these rather unattractive looking planters in the corners here, which have been built out of these large stones, and again this sort of form of cascade over here in the corner, that's all going to be going. The pond is going to be dug out a little bit deeper because it's too shallow here and there's quite a few issues with the heron, and then the inside of the pond is going to be lined with a nice natural stone to conceal this edge of lining which is evident here in the pond. So as you can see, lots of work. I shall be doing this pretty much solo, and I'll document the progress as I go over the next few weeks. But for today, initially, it's going to be a full drain, take out all the water and reserve as much of this as possible, set up a holding tank for the livestock, and then just get all of the peripherals out of the way, all of the stonework and bits and pieces here, so that we can get to the liner and get to a clean slate. So the pond has been drained, as you can see, and I'm now going around saving all of the valuable plants. The hornwort wants to be retained. I want to keep hold of this. This is a very important plant. Obviously water lilies, they're going to be salvaged as well. And now is the time for me to start hooking out the fish. Might seem a bit stressful seeing the fish floundering around like this in the shallow water, but it's much less stressful for the fish and a lot easier to try and catch them when the pond is very shallow like this, and it saves chasing them around with a net when you've got deep water. So one tip, never try and catch the fish until you're down to the last few inches. Very easy job now of me just going around scooping up some of these goldfish as I go along. A bit too hot for waders and gloves like this today, so it's quite nice to have a bit of relief kneeling down in this cold water. There's lots of dragonfly larvae and water boatmen and beetles and newts. Haven't seen any frogs yet. Now amphibians, if I catch them, I'll just put them somewhere discreetly in the shade in the garden and they'll be absolutely fine. They'll return to the pond once it's redone. Beetles, water boatmen, pond skaters, they're all airborne, so again they can go off somewhere in the bushes and they'll fly off and find another pond if needs be. But dragonfly larvae, there's some lovely great big larvae. In fact, I've got one right here. Lovely beasties. These sort of things we want to hang on to, and of course they're going to die, they're not going to fly off, so I need to salvage these and put these into the holding tank as well. So it's another day on the job, and how the weather has changed. Gone is the lovely sunshine, and now we've got some quite nice cooling rain. So the bulk of the excavation has been done. All of the shelving has been sculpted out of the sides. Everything is pretty level, which is very important. You know, when you're digging it out, it's always really important to make sure that the pond shell, the base of the pond, the sides, the edges, the shelves, etc., are all nice and neat. You know, it's much more important to get the excavation done correctly, and then laying the liner and doing the stonework on top then is that much easier. The bulk of the digging has been really nice, sort of soft, slightly sandy, slightly clay substrate, but now I've got down to the Horsham stone, the West Sussex sandstone and the clay layer, so it's getting tough now. If you ever want to lose weight, dig a pond. I can highly recommend it. we go. Still, once I've got through this, the bulk of the digging's done and the fun bit starts. I can get the underlay and the liner in, start bringing in some of the materials, the rock work, and start building the pond. Snack time. Oh, so that is the bulk of the digging done. I can go around now, start tamping the sides and the base. I'm going to have to work my way around all the pond and feel for any protrusions, roots, rocks, anything that might potentially damage the liner. And then I can measure up for the liner. It's always worth digging the hole before measuring the liner. It's very difficult to order a piece of liner and dig a hole to fit it. So much better to dig the hole, get the dimensions and the size that you want that fits the space, then measure up and then order your liner. Right, I'm in a position now to measure up for the pond liner. But there is a formula to work this out, and it's quite an easy calculation. If you measure the maximum length, the maximum width and the maximum depth in whatever measurements that you want to use, double that depth and then add that figure onto the length and onto the width. So for example, if you had a 3 feet deep pond and you double the depth, that's 6 feet, add that figure onto the maximum length and onto the maximum width, and then you add an extra 1 foot or 30 centimeters of overlap all round. However, as much as I trust that formula, I always like to double check and make sure that the measurements are absolutely bang on, and so I will also lay a flexible tape through the width and the depth following the contours of the hole. Now you can do this with a piece of string, cut it off and then measure it afterwards, or tie some knots in it and then measure it afterwards, but I'm just using this long flexible measure here, and I'm laying it down over every single contour, holding it down in place with a stone. There we go. So the liner itself will be coming up to the top of the brickwork here, and I've just added a little extra overlap just so I can get the tape you know, sort of held into position and fixed. It's a bit easier on my own to do this, and I will add a slightly larger overlap when I've got my calculation, but I'm just continuing down through the contours like this, holding the tape in place, and I'll come back up to the other side. This will be approximate water level, but I'll measure up to the top here, and then I'll record that measurement, and I'll do exactly the same on the width as well, and that will give me an accurate measurement for the pond liner size. Now once you've got your measurements for the pond liner, it's very easy then to work out an area, and then from that you can work out square meterage of the pond underlay. So I'll get these measurements, work out the liner size, then I'll work out the area from that and see how much pond underlay I need, and then I'll get on the phone and order it. So I'm just in the process now of preparing the stonework and making it ready to lay. Essentially what I'm doing is sort of, you know, cropping and creating my own bricks. What I've got here is some York stone crazy paving, New York, not reclaimed, crazy paving. And I'm just using a disc cutter and cutting this up into sort of usable brick size-ish pieces. Now the beauty of that is that one stone like this has got generally at least 2 faces, so cutting it in half means you get twice the amount of material, and sometimes you can get sort of 3 pieces out of it, so it makes this pile of stone go an awful lot further, and it'll make it a lot more regular and uniform and easier to lay. Now I'm not going to use just this gauge of stone, I'm also going to break it up with some much bigger, chunkier pieces, some feature stones, and you know, just to make a bit more interest. But it's quite laborious. Having hand sort of unloaded this ton from my van to a pile over here, I then bring it over here by hand, cut it, wash it by hand, and then wheelbarrow it back over to the pond by hand. So 1 ton ends up becoming about 4 tons by the time it's been moved. And I imagine I'll be probably sinking 2 or 3 tons of rock into this, so that's going to equate to a lot of man hours of doing this. But it's worth it, the finish is fantastic, and it's that sort of nice bespoke touch that makes all the difference with jobs like this. Now once you've got all the ground finally prepared, if you've got a little wait before you can put the pond liner and the underlay in, you want to make sure you get this covered over. You don't want it to dry out too much because it's going to start to, well, if it's clay, it's going to shrink and crack and contract and bits are going to break off. And if you've got heavy rain, that's going to potentially sort of damage the finish if you've got a sandier sort of soil. So I've got to, wait probably 2 or 3 days before the liner's ready to lay. And in that time, I shall put the old pond liner back into this excavation and then a bit of tarp all around the edge, just to make sure that all this is protected and kept, slightly damp and slightly moist beneath that covering. Just using a little chisel here as well, just so I can scrape away some of the imperfections. I know a lot of these things you're not even going to notice when it's 2 feet, 3 feet underwater, but I notice these things. Well, good morning. It's another day on the job, and I've got a helping hand with me today. I've actually got my son dragged out of bed. Say hello, Scott.
You're right.
So today we're just bringing in some materials and hopefully we'll get the pond lined. You can see that last week, Friday, I was just chopping up some of the stonework and just dry stone laying, just so I could kind of visualise the finished height and layers. It's going to come up higher than this, but it just gives me an idea of sort of the potential look. So I find it quite helpful to be able to, at stages, start laying and building up things like this, just sort of mocking it up so I can see as it goes. So all this is coming out, the old line is coming out, the ground's going to have a final dress just to make sure no sharp stones and objects have fallen down, and then the fleece and the lining will go in and we can start to put it back together again. Right, we're at the pond filling stage now, and this is the important bit, because you need the weight of the water to pull the pond lining down so you can get a nice, neat and very taut finish on the pond lining. So you can see here I'm filling in stages. Initially we've pulled out the liner nice and taut over the top of the excavation and just sort of weighed it down with a few stones and rocks around the edges, and then filled 4 or 5 inches of water initially just to get the liner sort of bedded down, to put a bit of weight in the pond. And I filled up now to the first terrace, and this has allowed me to neatly fold some creases. In a pond like this, in this shape, square or rectangular, you should be able to minimise creases to the 4 corners, and you can neatly create a double fold like this in one corner and pull it up nice and taut, weigh it down with some stones, and once you've got the weight of the water up against this, this is almost not noticeable at all. I'm not concerned about any creases around the top layer, because all that's going to be underneath stone and planting, and to be honest, any creases in the depth of the pond aren't really going to be noticed either. So it's just making sure that the folds are nice and neat. So today's the first day of laying some stone. You can see that I'm just building up one of the sides here. Probably mentioned before, but I'm using well, mostly York stone. This is York crazy paving, which I've then cut up and chopped to create these sort of uniform bricks. But I've also got the odd piece of Horsham stone dotted around in here, which, I mean, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. It's a very, very similar sort of colour and texture, so it ties in really nicely. And it's nice to break up, I think, the combination of stone with some thinner pieces and some chunkier pieces, just to break it up a little bit. I've started off on the shelf with some much larger pieces of stone that span the full width of the shelf here, and that's partly cosmetic. It's nice to see a lip of stone on the inside here to hide the liner, but it's also because it provides a good foundation for the walling above, and it helps to displace the weight of the stone and the wall here. And having laid all the stonework, I'm now just going around and raking out the joints. I want to try and create sort of the illusion of, you know, a dry stone wall, that kind of effect. I want the cracks and the nooks and crannies and the odd little cave here because it's great habitat for wildlife, and I don't want to be able to see too much cement or sort of render. Now obviously this is underwater, and ultimately water level is going to be probably about sort of here, so we've got, you know, the majority of this is submersed, and you're not really going to see any of the cement anyway, or staining if there was any, but I think it's always best to try and get rid of it now whilst you can. So I'm just using a little trowel, a brush, anything that you can get down into the joints here just to rake it out. Wait until the cement has gone off a little bit before you attempt this. So this has been sat here now for a couple of hours, and it's dry and hard enough that anything that falls on the stonework beneath isn't going to stain anything. Now I can afford to be messy. It doesn't matter if this falls in the pond. All of this water at the end of the job is going to be drained out, and the whole pond is going to be cleaned, and all of the slurry and the muck that collects is going to be dredged and taken out also. Now, as part of this build, I'm also incorporating some LED submersible lighting. The Awaza Power LED set, which is a fantastic little light set, and I will show it to you. I'll just drop my brush. Oh, I won't be using that one now. But the Power LED set's a fantastic light set, really, really bright, powerful LEDs. Each LED is the equivalent of 50 watts, but it's only consuming 5 watts of power. And we've got 3 of these that are going in this pond. 2 of them are going to be going in either sort of diagonal corner, shining away from the viewing area. That's important because you don't really want lights glaring and shining towards where you're going to be viewing. And there's going to be also a 3rd light sat beneath the what will be the stainless steel water blade or the sheer descent, so that we can illuminate that curtain of water that falls into the pond. There will also be a special strip light LED that will sit inside the stainless steel sheer descent, and that creates a nice effect as well of this sort of slightly soft muted LED light within the cascade itself. Very nice. And what I like to do is, the lights themselves have a couple of different fixing options. I mean, they're weighted, which is a start. A lot of submersible lights aren't weighted, which is amazing. They'll bob around in the pond, so you have to sort of anchor them down somehow. The Awaza lights are weighted. They have a weighted sort of base that you can clip it onto, and you can articulate the light and you can position it at any angle. But again, in a pond, they get caught up in, you know, the fish knock them over and they get caught up in the plants and things. So you also get a ground stake. This is designed that this could be pushed into the ground out of the pond, and then you can slip the light on and angle that. And these lights are actually fantastic out of water. But what I'll do with the ground stake is I'll render this into place into the walling with just enough of the bracket sticking out so that I can clip a light on, and it can be articulated around on that wall. The cable can be fed discreetly down between the cracks in some of the stones, and it's just a slightly more permanent fixture for the lighting, and it keeps it nice and neat and tidy. I've got to remember to put these in the right position before I get too carried away with laying the stonework. And likewise, pipe work, inlets, outlets, conduits for cables, these are all going to be discreetly routed down amongst the stonework. I have to make sure I remember that before I do put all the stone down. It won't be the first time that I've got carried away, built a bit of wall and realised I have to knock some of it down to put some pipe in. So I'm going to carry on working my way around, just scraping out all of these joints. I've got a bit of time left this afternoon to just cut some more stone, and then tomorrow I will continue to lay the stone around the edge. It's probably going to take me most of the week to try and get all 4 sides complete, but I'll keep you updated with progress as I go along.